All right, so this is the book in a nutshell, right at the beginning. As you'd guess, we're going to start with Chapter 1. We'll go through chapters, believe it or not, we'll probably go through 1, 2, and 3 today. And what we'll do is I'll mix in giving you some examples, but tomorrow, all right, so we'll do 1, 2, and 3 today. Tomorrow we'll look at the homework, all right. Fridays from now on, what I'd like to do, what I'm hoping to be able to do for the rest of the semester, is every Friday will be a lab day. All right, that's my hope that we're able to do that. All right, next Monday, we'll see how things go. I mean, I want to just see where we are. All right, Tuesday, again, we'll see where we are. A week from today, I'm not here. You're still expected to be here. Mr. Corrigan will open the door. He will take attendance. If you're tardy, you'll write tardy. If you're absent, you'll write absent. I'm going with Brandon Fan. We're going out to Pike Technical College. Oh, no. All right. And remember, I'd like to see by next week around Tuesday what you've been doing for the midterm. So, well, I haven't done anything yet. You'll have all period Friday to start working on it. All right, so we're going to go right now over chapters 1, 2, and 3. 1 is an intro to web development. Hoping we get that done in 10 or 15 minutes. All right, chapter 2 is getting started with JavaScript. Chapter 3 is the essential JavaScript statements. So after we get done with chapters 1, 2, and 3, not this week, but probably next week, you're going to have your first test already. All right, on chapters 1, 2, and 3. Then we'll do 4 and 5, have a test. Then we'll do 6 and 7, have a test. Now, it's probably going to work out best. I know, Keegan, what you said as far as, it's kind of nice to be able to do a new thing. We'll see how that works. But it might be that once we start to add JavaScript to a website, we just keep building on that one. All right, that'll actually probably be easier for you to do. Then, again, we'll do 8 and 9 because we'll switch over then from JavaScript to jQuery. We'll do 8 and 9. We'll take a test. We'll do 10, 11, and 12. We'll take a test. All right?
The hands-on test for 10, 11, and 12?
Yeah. Well, right. But there are written tests for these.
Every chapter?
I'm going to look. I've got to go and look and see what the author has provided. Now, what I'm thinking of doing, there's probably a pretty good chance, is after we get done with 1 through 7, rather than going into the jQuery, I might do some of the advanced stuff first because that's still just regular JavaScript. So we may change the order around. I plan on going over the first 17 chapters. You will not be tested on chapter 17. I will not go over chapter 18. You work with ifs and stuff. They're very hard. All right. So we will go over 16 chapters that you'll be tested on, which will be about 4 or 5 tests. I don't know. I've got it laid out. If we can stick to the schedule I want, at a minimum, the last week of the year, and I'm hoping for the last 2 weeks, are going to be all lab. They'll give you a chance to catch up on any homework. Plus, remember, you're going to have to work on that online portfolio. All right, so that's my hope.
Is that the final, the online portfolio?
That's the equivalent of a final, yeah. And basically, that's the equivalent of a final that you'll have for every class. All right. So this stuff we've had already. How a web application works. We'll talk a little bit more about the components of a JavaScript app. We've talked about the HTML skills you need. We talked about the CSS skills you need. We'll talk a little bit about how to test a JavaScript application. This thing right here, Aptana, is yet another editor that you can use. I'm not going to talk a bit about these. So this 7 or 8 pages, I'm going to skip them. I would, if there's anything on the test, on a written test about them, I'm going to remove it. If you want to use Aptana, go for it. All right. I mean, do you want to? I guess that's up to you. Then in chapter 2, how to include JavaScript in an HTML document. We looked at this a little bit yesterday. Then start talking about syntax. All right. How to work with JavaScript data. Objects, methods, and properties. It's going to be so light when we go over this. It's only 4 or 5 pages. And then we're going to look at 2 applications. We're going to look at the 2 applications the author gives you. Finally, we'll look at, as it says there, conditional statements, control statements, and we'll look again at these apps that we were looking at before, miles per gallon, test scores, and this future value thing. We'll talk a little bit about arrays. There's a lot of stuff we're going to cover. All right? I'm taking for granted that if there's something that doesn't make sense to you, you're going to ask. All right? So part 1, which is the first 7 chapters, as it says, give you the essential JavaScript skills. Chapter 1 has some concepts and terms, but it's more about web applications totally, not just JavaScript. Chapter 2 is, as it says, we're going to start learning about Java, the Java language. 3 and 4 will complete learning about the Java language. Chapter 5 is all on testing and debugging. So I'm going to show you how to debug. I'll create programs that purposely have errors in them so we can learn how to fix those. All right. Chapter 6 talked a little bit yesterday about the DOM, the document object model. That's all of chapter 6. And chapter 7 is with images and timers. You remember yesterday I showed you, we just looked at the pictures in the book of how you can use JavaScript to have a bunch of thumbnail diagrams. You can click any one, and then down below you can show a bigger picture of it. That's what they're going to talk about. Timers are just that. I'll show you how to set a timer. So for instance, well, not next week, but I'm also found out that Friday, December 6th, I'm going to be gone then too from this class. What I do is every year I participate in this thing that Parkway School has. Parkway School is out near Chesterfield. It's called the Hour of Code. So last year I had the students build a simple application. This year we're going to have one that's pre-built and they're going to look at it. But I want to show you the kind of thing that we're...
Parkway.
What?
Parkway School.
It's out near Chesterfield. So this is what we're going to end up doing, is something like this. This may even end up being your test. I don't know. But if you look, here's a JavaScript guessing game, okay? So I come in here, you ought to guess a number between 1 and 100. 50. Now watch when I click this, watch. I'm not doing anything. It was too high. See that? That was a timer that made that disappear. Did you see it? So 25, check the guess. See that? Now watch. It's gone. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do that using timers. All right, boom. So we know that it's got to be between those two. Too low. 22. Too low. 23. There it is. So it tells you what the number is and how many guesses. I left the answer up there so you can see how long it took you. So you're going to learn how to build things like this. Now, it may not look like much, but there's enough code involved, all right, that it's fairly complex. All right, so let's start.
Okay, I have a question now. So anyone that I've ever talked to about JavaScript, which is about like 8 or 9 people, all of them have said it is the worst thing in the world and they hated it.
Well, I will tell you, I may have said this before, maybe I said this to you guys, but the day after, when I was at the job fair, I talked to this lady from that Daughtry place, and I said, if you were telling somebody who was going into IT right now what they should be concentrating on, what would you recommend? She goes, JavaScript, JavaScript, and JavaScript.
Of course you did.
That's what she said. Now, the real hard stuff is using it on the server. We're not doing any of that. Not until next fall. So you'll already have beginning JavaScript down, you'll have C# down. So it won't be that big of a thing. All right? All right. So, Chapter 1. How a web app works. You saw this picture earlier. We looked at this when we started the course. So why talk about it again? Well, the reason for talking about it again is when you're in here and you're figuring out how to take an application and send it to your phone or your tablet or your computer, we've done nothing so far other than that Bootstrap example that I showed you. We've done nothing with JavaScript. Absolutely nothing, has been interactive in the program. Nothing. If you wanted to change something, you had to stop the program from running, go to the HTML file or the CSS, change it, and then run it again. All right? That's how you did interactivity, which is not interactivity. But with JavaScript, you will have interactivity. I mean, you don't have any choice. So what we've done so far and what we're going to continue to do are static web pages. A static web page ends with .html. It can also end with .htm if you want it to. That was the olden days. All right, but it pretty much doesn't anymore. Now, dynamic web pages, that's what we do next fall. You will have a page that might end with .aspx or .php, but that brings in JavaScript and the interactivity. All right? And you've seen stuff like this. I mean, this is an Amazon page. All right. You know, if I go out, I'm not going to do it, but if I go out to Amazon right now, Amazon.com, and I scroll down, it's going to say, you recently looked at these books. People who bought these books also bought these books. In other words, they're trying to get me to spend some money, right? That's interactivity. How do they know what books I looked at? They keep track of that stuff. All right.
Is that also like use ads that like come up on
they can do. Some places will target ads. In other words, if you are out on a website and you click a certain ad, all right, let's say that I clicked an ad for hair growth, then it would start showing me more of those types of ads. All right, and it does that, and you're going to learn about this later by using something that are called cookies. Not the kind you eat, but we'll talk about cookies. All right, so how JavaScript is used for client-side processing. That is solely how we're using JavaScript, client side. So it's everything you're going to put in. But you know, if you remember, because you've been doing this now, like when you did your last test, what did you have? You had a folder called Hot File. What did that folder have in it? A folder called CSS, a folder called Images. It had a bunch of .html files, and then you had an empty folder that was called JS. That's where you're going to be putting your stuff, is in that folder. And JavaScript files must end with a .js extension. So the system realizes that they're JavaScript files. Just like CSS files end with a .css extension, and HTML files with a .html extension. Same kind of thing. So they show you here, this is all the way up on page 11, how this kind of stuff works. You're going to learn how to do things like this. What do I mean? Well, take a look. This is the landsend.com. I don't know if it still looks like this or not. But right now, if I take my mouse that's right here, if I put it over here, this shirt will turn blue. Does that make sense? All right. And what is that? That's interactivity. They call it an image rollover. Because if you take your mouse and you roll it over one of these images, that image changes. You will learn how to do that. Is that hard to do? Well, that's, like you said with your friend, it's like when you do anything the first time, it's a little difficult, but you're going to do exercises that will do it. And they'll be based off the same exercises that are in the book, where they show you they show you the code. So, all right, so where JavaScript fits in, well, you've been doing this so far. You've been making requests, and you've been getting back HTML, but now you'll also get back JavaScript. One of the one of the things we're going to learn to do in here, we're going to write a fairly complex contact form. And then we're going to learn, you already know a little bit of how to validate that using HTML. Remember you had fields we put required there? That's validation. All right? But you're going to learn how to validate them using JavaScript. Then we'll come back and learn how to validate them using jQuery. And with jQuery, you've got your choice. You can either write code, or you can bring in what's called a plugin that'll write a lot of the code for you. We'll do both, all right, as we go on in here. So again, JavaScript is a scripting language. It is a full-fledged programming language, all right? It's also known, because some languages, next fall, when you learn C# C# is called an object-oriented programming language. JavaScript is an object-based programming language. What's the difference? With an object-based language, you can use objects, but you don't have to. Next semester, when we do C#, you have to use objects for everything you do. And it's not as difficult as it even may sound. All right? So, our JavaScript will run solely on the client. Okay? And then after we get done, we're talking about JavaScript, we'll go into jQuery. jQuery is a JavaScript library. In other words, jQuery is JavaScript. All right? So, I'm not even going to ask you this, but I'll hide it a little bit. So, right there. It says there, what you need to know about the Ecmascript Specification. Okay? When you type in a website, you type in www. something. What does a www stand for?
World Wide Web.
Yeah. And there's actually a place called the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. They're in charge of everything HTML. They're in charge of everything CSS.
What do you mean in charge of it?
What I mean is, if something is going to change, they put out what are called recommendations. And basically all the browsers say, yeah, that sounds good, and they do it. So they become law. Now, what's different is JavaScript is not under control of the W3C. It's under control of Ecma. So actually, it's in charge. The people in charge are from Europe. All right. It's the European Computer Manufacturers Association. They do similar types of things where they make recommendations, etc. All right. Now, I'm going to ask that you do this right now because I just thought of this. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but again, if you go out to w3schools.com, not .cm.com, and you look under tutorials, they've got a complete JavaScript tutorial right here. That's got so much more than we could ever go over. I mean, look at it. It's right here. So basically anything you could think of. So when we get to talking about JavaScript with a DOM, if you're like, I'm just totally frickin' confused, I'd start by going out here and finding JS browser or JS HTML DOM. All right. The other place that so again, I would take and bookmark or do whatever you're going to do with this. The other one is I think it's org. Developer.mozilla.org. All right. If I look here for references, all right, they've got all sorts of stuff. I'm going to have to look. I don't remember exactly where it is, but someplace in here, they've got, again, virtually everything there is for JavaScript. All right. So if I come in here and I put in this is it. So that's it, right there. I'd suggest that you go out there and bookmark that. Because again, anything that W3 Schools doesn't have, they'll have. Sometimes too, they'll have a better explanation. W3 Schools will probably have better code examples, but developer.mozilla.org will have a better description of something.
Okay, this is also a question I have. So you see how the W in web and J in JavaScript are capitalized?
Yes.
So if I were to type that in...
If you type it into Word, if you type JavaScript in lowercase, it'll give you a warning.
Oh, okay.
it'll expect that there's a capital J and a capital S. That's whoever created this, that's just what they decided to do. Yeah. All right, so you both have this if you want it? All right. So it's been around for quite a while. If you notice, the first release was 22 years ago, and it's not going anywhere. If anything, as I mentioned to you before, it's probably the most popular language there is out there. All right. The components of a JavaScript application. We looked at this a little bit yesterday. I realized that you were working on the test, but if you look right here, if we create an HTML file and a JavaScript file, we don't put any CSS, that's as ugly as it's going to look. All right? So we can pretty it up with CSS. You know that. And I believe you could all do that, where you would set the labels to a certain width, etc., and then have them float like to the left or the right, and then it would look pretty if you wanted that to happen. All right? So that's the code for your index.html file. Nothing new there. All right? Except we're going to have a link now to our JavaScript. That is new. So once we add CSS, there it is. All right? And then we add the JavaScript. Well, this is new. All this stuff in here is new. And do I expect this to make sense? I expect that I'm going to go over it with you. We did this yesterday. I'm doing it again. And I'm expecting you to at least start looking at it, and hopefully it'll start making sense. I'm going to make this a lot smaller so we can see as much of this stuff as possible. All right, so what are we doing here? This line here that you see, this line in blue that says script source equals email underscore list.js. That line, okay, is going to go into your HTML. But the file, the way we're going to do it, ours will say source equal js slash email underscore list.js. Does that make sense? We're going to put it into that JS folder. Again, all of your JavaScript is going to go into your JS folder. All right, then here's the code. Again, I mentioned this yesterday. It may be confusing. Look at this. This right here, the stuff that you see here, well, try it like this. That stuff in blue. All right. Do you know what an alias is? You guys know what an alias is? It's like, let's say that I decide that I'm going to start going out on Twitter and I want to be able to comment on other instructors. I might give myself a Twitter alias name, that would be called the Destructor or something like that. That would be my alias, so people wouldn't know who I am. I don't do that, but you get the idea. This line that's right here, that's actually one line of code, this whole thing right there. This says, I want to use a $sign instead of using this. That line of code that you see here, the var that ends with the semicolon at the end, that says, I want to use the $sign as an alias for document.getElementById. Why would you want to do that? Because that's typing one letter, the $sign, as opposed to about 20 letters. All right? So these three lines right here, or these two lines, see this right here that's got, this is email address 1, this is email address 2, this is first name. All right? This says, take whatever somebody put into that first text box for email address 1 and put it in something where we can play with it. This is called, these three lines right here that you see in blue, they're called variable declarations. So let's say that I was writing a program to see whether or not you could get into a bar. Okay? And I came in there and I said var legal age equal 21. Then legal age would be the variable, 21 would be its value. Then I could say if I'd ask you your age. And I'd say if your age is greater than or equal to legal age. Does that make sense? All right. And this other variable that you see here is valid is called a Boolean variable. If right now I did this, because this is the easiest one for people to get. I said var is married, and I said equal true. What does that mean? That means I'm married. If you're not married, you'd set it equal to false. Usually when you write variables like this that are Boolean, true or false, you start it with the word is. You don't have to, but it's usually easier for people to understand if you do that. All right? So then we come down here, and what are we doing? This should be pretty obvious to you. We're saying if email address 1 is empty, so if we put nothing in there, if we put absolutely nothing in there, then we're going to get an error over here in red that is going to say this field is required. And it's invalid because it's only valid if I fill out all three fields. So I'm going to set is valid equal to false. Otherwise, I don't want there to be any message here. So you can see how they put there grace@yahoo.com. Since we put something there, we don't have any error message. Does that make sense? There's nothing in red there. Then the second one, we have to check for two things. First, we have to check that they put in something in there, and we have to make sure those two are equal. They're not because we left the second one blank. Since we left the second one blank, we get that error. The entry must equal first entry. What code is that? That's this code that's right here. That says if the first entry we put in does not equal the second entry, write down there this entry must equal first entry. Why am I showing you that? Because that's this. That's this code. All right? Otherwise, we would put no error there. We have an error there. All right? Then we check for the first name. Notice that's also empty. So where it says this field is required right here in the picture, that code is right here. This is what writing code is all about. Somebody tells you, I want a program that does this. Let's say it's for a movie theater, and they want to make sure that people, somebody comes in there and says, I want to go to this movie, and it's R-rated. If you walked in, they might ask you what's your birth date. Not even how old are you. They might ask you what's your birth date. Because let's say that you were born, let's just say, in 2004. So you're 15 and you're trying to get into an R-rated movie. If they say, what's your birth date? And somebody says, October 23rd, 2004, they know. Or they'll ask you how old you are, and you'll say 15. They'll say, what year were you born in? Or if you say 17, what year were you born in? And if you say 2004, you just lied. You either lied by saying you're 17, or you lied by saying that's the year you were born. Does that make sense? Yeah. But you write code to check things like that. And what you'll find as we start going through this is a lot of the code that you write is what's called error checking code. Error checking code is like car insurance. I'm going to guess, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm going to guess you both have car insurance. All right? Okay, well, the point is, if you have car insurance, and I've been driving now for 50 years. Or not 50, 45. But in an ideal world, how many times in your life do you use car insurance?
Every day.
No, never.
Why?
I don't want to use my car insurance. If I use it, it means either I got into an accident or my car stopped at the end of the, but you buy car insurance for defensive purposes, right? You hope you'll never need it, but if you need it, you might need it bad. That's how you code. You put a lot of defensive code in there that you hope will never run. But if it ever does run, bad things could potentially happen if you don't program for them. I always tell people this story. It's true. I didn't make this up. And because people have asked, no, it wasn't me who did this. Back in the old days, before you were born, back when telephones, you've seen pictures of them. When you used to pick it up and you got dial tone and you had the rotary dial, all right, that's when I was working for AT&T Bell Labs as a programmer. That's the kind of phones we used. Somebody who had put out code that went out to New York, all right, they put out a bunch of code, and what they needed to add in their code, we'll talk about what all this is later, but they needed to do this. They needed to say default break, which means if you ever get into this condition, get the heck out. That's all it means. If you ever get here, get out. That's all it means. This person did not put those 2 lines of code in there. All right? And when they put this new code out there, it was out right outside of New York, and it was 2 days before Mother's Day. And the code broke. They lost $8 million that weekend because Mother's Day is when all sons who feel, I should call mom, at least on that day they have to call her. They couldn't get dial tone. This was back in the days, there were no cell phones. There was no way. They couldn't go to a regular phone booth and see had the same problem. So anybody who lived there could not call, all right, and it was a pretty big area. So they lost tons of money. That was defensive coding. They managed to track down the person who didn't put it in, and they said to him, why didn't you put it in? And he said, that'll never happen. It happened. So you always have to program defensively. That's the bottom line. All right. The HTML skills you'll need, well, that's what we were working on, right? You did all that stuff. I'm not going to go and talk about those. Div and span, just so you know the difference between a div and a span. A div is called a block level thing, takes up the whole line. A span is an inline, it only takes up part of the line. All right, if you want a better description of that, you can take a look right here, down towards the bottom of page 23. All right, how to use those attributes, that's what we just finished. So I'm not going to go over those a bit. CSS skills, you know what those are. You just went over those. All right, so I'm not going to go over any of those either. Style rules, no. Now, so let's finish up this chapter by looking at how to test a JavaScript application. There's different ways that you can run JavaScript files. All right. The easiest way right here is to go and hook up your JavaScript to your HTML and run your HTML. Then the JavaScript runs. That's it. That's the easiest way to do it. So the author says there's 4 ways of doing it. It's not that important. The important thing is, can you run your JavaScript? All right. And if you put it in directly or indirectly into your HTML, the answer is yes. All right. How to find errors in your code? What's going to happen? Remember when we hit that F12 key when we looked at a website and it brought up the developer tools? Well, the developer tools have a thing called console. So when you try to run your program and you make a mistake and you bring it up in the console, it'll tell you what your error or errors are and the line of code it found it on. So you can go back and fix it. We're going to do that. We'll have, I think it's chapter 5. The whole chapter is on doing this. Cross-browser, you know what this is? You know what this is? You want your application to look the same whether somebody is looking at it in Firefox or Chrome or IE or Edge or Opera, etc. That's cross-browser compatibility.
The ranking website does not work in Safari.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
I also renamed some frustrating.
We're going to be done with this chapter in about 2 minutes. All right, so these are the current browsers. Now this was as of like 2018, late in the year. Okay, so these are going to be higher. All of these are. I mean, Internet Explorer, yeah, I don't know if 12 has ever come out, but you can go out to HTML5 test if you care. There's that normalize. We used that already. Here are some CDNs. We talked about these yesterday. Don't worry about CDNs now. When we get into talking about jQuery, we'll use CDNs. Again, starting on 38, no Aptana, no Aptana. And that finishes the chapter. All right, so it is 8:43. Let's come back at 9 o'clock. We're going over chapter 2.